Welcome back to another episode of the Hustle Nation podcast. Today is episode 6 in a 6-part series. And in this episode, we're going to talk about lying to yourself and the power of a framework. So, Justin, I've come to the conclusion that, especially earlier on in my career, I've definitely lied to myself in a number of different capacities. But I also believe that that's something that everyone does, for better or worse. Now, there are obviously positive lies, but there are a lot of times we kind of take ourselves out of a positive attitude, a positive mindset, and we don't tell ourselves the truth. Can you tell the audience what it means to lie to yourself and the concept of how that can rob our personal growth?
So, our brains are incredibly powerful things. And we know this because, study after study proves that our brain, if we channel our brains right, we can actually change our physical self, which is kind of insane when you think about it. And so we know our brains are super powerful. And you said it, right? You lie to yourself. I lie to myself. Every human lies to herself. It's the way our brains are actually programmed and wired, right? So our brains are actually designed to have us survive. Like the number one job we as humans are trying to do is just survive, just stay alive. And we see this all the time, and it's in all different scenarios. So, as an example, we've done this, with groups we've talked to, right? If you ever are sitting in a group and you ask everybody in the room, simple question, raise your right hand as high as you can. Everybody raises their hand as high as they can. And then you say, raise it a little bit higher. And guess what? Everyone raises it a little bit higher. And then we say, raise it a little bit higher. And all of a sudden, after 3 or 4 asks, you have some people maybe standing on tables and chairs and all that sort of stuff. And it's like, that was the simplest request I could have possibly given you, which was just raise your right hand as high as you can. And yet every single one of you raised it higher at least the second time. Well, why is that? Well, it's because we as humans are trained to be average. Our brains want us to be normal because normal means we survive. We stay in their pack. We don't stick out. We don't get clipped off or anything like that. And it's that kind of behavioral contagion that exists that keeps us all together. And so our brains are wired to, okay, stay in the comfort zone, stay in the comfort zone, stay in the comfort zone. And we know that's not really where real growth happens. And so to me, it's acknowledging that, look, we all lie to ourselves. This is also why we can have really incredible behaviors and then fall off the wagon and get into really destructive behaviors. The exact same person. And now some of it could be driven by an outside force, but in a lot of cases, it might just be, you just get into a rut. You're like, oh no, I can eat this. I can eat that. And you literally lie to yourself like, oh, well, I didn't eat that much candy today. Right. And it's not even that you're actually recognizing what's actually going on. And so to me, it's one, recognizing that we all lie to ourselves. It's programmed into our brain, but then it's what the heck do we do about it? Right. Knowing that it exists is one thing, but then what the heck can we do about it? And to me, this has been the light bulb moment of the power of a framework. Why do airline pilots have a checklist before they take off? The reality is they know exactly what they're doing. Can you imagine going on a plane and believing that the only way it's going to be successful is if the pilot follows the checklist? Like, that would scare the absolute crap out of me, right? Like, I want that pilot to be able to fly it with or without the checklist. But I do actually like that they use the checklist, because we know that even they are super skilled and super focused, the reality is their brains are programmed to miss stuff. It's programmed to take shortcuts, programmed to stay in the comfort zone, right? And so by going through that checklist, it creates that's their mini framework in a lot of ways. It allows them to go to back. So like when I think about, again, even you and I've talked about this, when we built out the framework for the 2020 vision guide, then we, as well as building out the hustle framework, literally as we're going through rewatching the trainings that we built, all of a sudden saying, wait, am I doing that? I'm telling people to do that. Am I actually doing that? And that's the level of extreme insanity that our brains actually have, where it's that, but by having that framework, it allows you to come back to, okay, well, what are the steps? What is the framework? What are the things that I know through my own experience and through the experience of others before me, that these are the steps that work. And if I use those steps that work, it reprograms your brain to have confidence in what the things are, create clarity in where the gaps are and where the next steps are. So you can eliminate that kind of overpowering of the brain that ends up lying to yourself and sending you off path.
Yeah, Dustin, the real problem I have is that I don't care who you are, you start to believe the lies you tell yourself, whether it be, the food you referenced or how hard you're working, the number of hours you're putting in. And it is really hard to have any self-awareness. So if you do get feedback from someone, whether it be a family member or a boss, you're going to get defensive. You're going, oh, no, I don't know. I can't. That's not true. And I want to flip the switch on that, though, because I do think there's a such thing as positive lies. And, if you look in the marketing world, they call them affirmations, and kind of how you feel, and some of it's self-talk that can reshape the mindset and your beliefs in a positive way. So what does that look like on your end?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's really about creating a confidence momentum in your brain, right? So to your point, affirmations, gratitude, a lot of these things kind of can create some of that positive momentum. And, the reality is to your comment of like positive lies, right? Like, as with anything, there's a line to everything. But I think a lot of times when people find themselves in a rut or in a gap of where they are versus where they want to be, to your point, the story that they're telling themselves is, I can't do this. I can't do that. I don't have the skill for this. I don't have the time. I don't have the energy. I'm tired, blah, blah, blah. Versus to your point, when you just flip that to, again, maybe nothing has changed, but by just saying, I can do this. I am confident I do it. Who's to say, why can't I do this? If this guy can do it, so, so can I. And a real simple thing that, a lot of people, whether everyone has different levels of, focus on religion and spirituality and things like that. Right. But there's a lot of people that find solace in saying that anytime you find a difficulty, you're never given more than you can handle, regardless of how much you think you can handle. Right.
I believe that.
And again, when you think that way, when you change the lens, then when bad things happen, it impacts you different. There was I'm forgetting who it was, but there was someone that I was listening to, I don't know if it was a podcast or a video or whatever, where they were basically saying every time someone would come to them and talk about the pain, struggle, anguish, shortcomings that they were having, kind of as a complaining, they would just respond with good, right? And the whole idea was good, because every time you're going through that struggle, that's building you strength so that next time you can overcome it, right? Now, it's an extreme example, which is why it's interesting. But when you, to your point, when you change that lens, when you change to use the power of your brain to overpower in a positive light, now you're changing yourself for the better. You're changing your momentum. You're changing your mindset, which again, that will lower your stress level. It'll increase your focus and allow you to move faster in the right direction.
One more thing I want to get to on lying to yourself before we get to the framework, and this really pertains to the 2020 Vision Guide, is the role of honesty versus optimism in personal and professional growth. And I say that because one of the biggest components here are the barriers that we write down, which are ultimately just the BS excuses as to why we think we can't achieve a goal. So we've talked about this in previous episodes. It could be, I can't read 20 books a year like you, Chris, because I don't have the air quotes time. And I think it's important to address that with honesty, because so often we do lie to ourselves. But more important, from the self-awareness, I think it's really important to have the self-awareness to then put that into light and say, you know what, I'm going to have some optimism. I'm going to have a positive outlook on this. And I'm going to say, you know what, I do have the time. And whether that's an affirmation or whether that's a positive lie, could be two different things. Only you have the self-awareness to be able to work through that. But I think there's a real discussion you need to have with yourself about being honest versus the optimism. and looking at some of those barriers.
Love the dichotomy between the two, because when you think about honesty and optimism.
Hold on. Sorry. All right.
Are good?
Yeah, maybe start over.
We're good. All right. So I love the dichotomy of honesty versus optimism, because if you think about a lot of the frameworks that we've built and we've talked about, you got to be honest about the past and optimistic for the future. And I think a lot of times people mix those two. We feel like, well, we've got to beat ourselves up, and that's where people get into like the blame and shame on a forward-looking basis. Look, you got to be honest about the past. You got to be honest about where you are. This is where, writing down, this is my current state. This is what's getting in my way. This is the things that I want. This is what I want my future to be. You have to be brutally honest there, because I think, to your point, if you are looking at it through rose-colored glasses, you're not going to be able to address the real gaps that you have, whether that be, scaling up or whatever. But to your point, then once you have that honesty with yourself, once you have that clarity vision, you can really be optimistic to the future, right? Because now you have that clarity, that confidence, that optimism that I know exactly where I'm going. I believe I know exactly how I'm going to get there. And so now I just need to do the work. I think a lot of times when any goal, but I think health is always just kind of an easy one. If someone has ever run a 10K and they kind of fell off the wagon and they hadn't run in a while, it's not really hard for them mentally to figure out how to run another 10K, because they've trained for it already. They know what it takes. They kind of know what it feels like. And so they can be honest about where they are. Like, I can be honest, I haven't ran in the last year and I'm out of shape, and I can't just walk out tomorrow and run that 10K, but I know this is what it's going to take. I know these are the steps, and I have very clarity, confidence that this is where I need to go. Well, then now you have that optimism to the future. So totally agree with you that and having that in a system and a process that you can keep coming back to makes it so much easier.
I think what you're getting at is the power of a framework reduces decision fatigue and overwhelm. And so with that said, let's get into the power of a framework, because I think, zooming out, we've come this far in the 6 episodes. A lot of people think, I have a plan, or a strategy or a vision. Well, all of that actually means nothing unless you have an implementation plan, which essentially what we're talking about is having the framework. How is this shit going to get done? And so let's talk about that, Dustin. What is a framework, and specifically as it relates to what we're trying to achieve here, which is making 2025 your best year ever?
Yeah. So, the 2 frameworks that we built that have been incredibly helpful for us and for others. The first is the 2020 vision guide, right? Which this is really setting out, how do you create that clear vision of where you're going and how you might get there. But, one that we don't talk about maybe quite as often, but actually the hustle framework, to me, I think then really takes that vision and allows you to actually create that map and that implementation plan to get there. And so for those that have not heard, so hustle, the acronym for us, it stands for hard work, unrelenting, smarter, not just harder, take chances, learn from others, and enjoy the process. And in each one of those pillars, what we've found is that each one of those things, there's subsections, subpoints that allow you to determine what are the steps, what are the behaviors, what are the cheat codes, what are the processes and systems that you can use in each one of those pillars to accelerate your ability to achieve goals in all domains based on that vision that you've set. And to me, that framework, what that allows you to do is it allows you to challenge yourself, to recenter yourself, because there's, what was the age-old quote, right? There's only 2 things in life that are certain, death and taxes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if there's a third one, to me, it's the fact that you're going to fall off the wagon. Like,
right.
It just is going to happen, right? Like, no human is perfect. No human is perfectly disciplined. You're going to fall off. But what you're going to find is those that have the most success isn't necessarily that they fall off less. They just get back on faster. And to me, that was, why did this framework even start? This framework started really to be self-serving, right? It was really about how do we achieve our own goals faster, right? And then you start learning these things, you start putting these things together. You're like, okay. And, Chris, as you've talked about, if you look at it through what a framework is, right? A framework gives you the things that have to happen or potentially don't have to happen, but they are ultimately like a recipe. And that, when all of a sudden you're making that pot of chili and it just tastes a little funky. Well, what do? You go back to be like, oh, well, you know what? I didn't put in the noodles, or I didn't put in the beans, or I didn't put in the spices, or I didn't put it like, yeah, this is just ground beef because I forgot to spice it up, right? Like, I mean,
Right.
But by going back to the framework, that's what allows you to be like, what did I miss? Or what am I missing? What are the things that I can do that can, make it be the best pot of chili that I've ever made? And that to me is the power of the framework, because it overpowers your brain to create that clarity, recenter yourself consistently, so that when you do fall off, you're not off for very long.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you're using my recipe framework. It's only something that I've created through probably decades and decades of spinning my wheels and being stuck in the hamster wheel. But I like the framework, and I think it matters because it it helps you achieve success in a way that keeps you on track. We've talked about this in previous episodes. It's okay to have an off day. It's okay to not go to the gym 2 or 3 days in a row. It's okay to have a cheat day when it comes to eating. But ultimately, I'm going to go to an example we really haven't talked about as much before, but you and I have talked about offline, which is the GPS example. And you've got a really good similar example you use. It's just kind of funny and kind of ironic how we both use this in business. But let's just say, for example, you and your wife agree tonight you're going to have a cross country trip by car. First, you have to know where you're going. You need an address. Otherwise, it's not going to be a very enjoyable trip, and it's probably going to take you a lot longer. You're going to have to know where to stop to eat. Maybe you want to see some sites, landmarks, etc. So you got to have an address. And some people don't even have a GPS. They have a compass. And I would argue there are some people that don't even have the compass. But a lot of folks are listening to this. Not only do they not have the compass, they don't have the address. And that to me that's the hamster wheel that it's so easy to get out of. So by going through this framework, which is the 2020 vision guide, and again, I want to stress something here before I go back to that example, is this is so easy, folks. Like, this is so easy and such a minimal time commitment that there's almost no excuse not to do it. And there's almost no excuse it's not going to work. So think about that for a moment. This gives you the address, and it becomes simultaneously the compass for how to get there. Now, if you start to implement, like, for example, you start to use the Hustle Daily Planner, that then becomes your GPS navigation. It's going to tell you how long the trip's going to take, how many miles. And then you're going to start to understand, where do we stop to stay? Where are we going to stop and eat? Where are we going to get gas? You have a fairly comprehensive roadmap, air quotes, framework for how to get there. So there's almost no excuses for you to get lost. There's almost no excuses for you not to have some answers as to where you're going to stop or how you're going to enjoy the most, what you're going to enjoy the most about this trip. Right?
Absolutely. And when you think about today, right, like you almost can't even imagine somebody taking a cross country trip now without, their phone or Google Maps or Apple Maps or whatever your technology is. And again, it doesn't mean that, even before, a regular map didn't work, right? A map was still a framework. It was just under the technology that we had. But, what did you do on that map? You're exactly right. It was, where am I going? How am I going to get there? How long is it going to take me? Do I have enough gas? Do I have a vehicle that'll make it? What other things do I need to be aware of? How much time is it going to take? All of those things. And yes, I completely agree. For anyone that is seeking out on any destination, right, whether it be a road trip or anything in life, we know that that's one of the biggest things. Now, again, if you've driven a car, you kind of know that framework, right? I mean, You've learned it over the years, but yet why do we still have why is there a low fuel light on a car? I mean, technically it should never exist. Like you
Right.
have a freaking gauge a foot in front of your face all times when you're driving the car. Why does a light need to come up telling you you're low on gas? Well, it's because if we lack a framework, sometimes people are like, oh, if you don't look at your gas every time you're in the car, or you're taking a long drive and you could run out of gas along the way, it's the perfect example. We get distracted, we get refocused. Maybe we need to skill up. We need a framework to tell us where to go.
Yeah. So, Dustin, as we zoom out, we put a bow on this episode. How can they take not just this episode, but all 6 and integrate that with the 2020 Vision Guide?
So one of the biggest differences between those that achieve their goals and not is just action. I mean, Chris, you and I talk about it, and we've spoken in front of thousands of people at this point, and we joke about it, right? Like, I mean, this 2020 Vision Guide, it costs nothing. Right. Literally, the only thing is it takes time, energy, and effort. And yet we know every time we stand in front of 100 people, less than 20 are going to literally follow the link and start filling it out. And going back to the 80-20 discussion, the action discussion we've had, right? Like to me, when you think about all of this stuff, we have to eventually take action. Nothing ever got done by just thinking about it. At some point, you just got to step up. You got to take action and do the work. The cool thing in today's world is it doesn't, as we've talked about, it doesn't necessarily have to be easy, but it can absolutely be simple. And when I look at the 2020 Vision Guide to Hustle Academy to all these different things, when things are simple, they actually feel easy. It doesn't mean it doesn't take work. It doesn't mean it doesn't take effort and action. But at the end of the day, it almost feels like a cheat code. And you hear that from people time and time again. Like it almost feels easy. And in reality, it's probably not easy, but it's so simple that it feels that way.
Yeah, I agree with you. I say that a lot. And there are statistics out there that point to the fact that the more simple we make things, that, I've seen statistics anywhere from 50 to 60% more probable we will achieve that thing if we make it more simple. And guess what? We as leaders and entrepreneurs, we make everything more complicated than it needs to be. And a lot of times that all comes from stopping and thinking. We just sit around, we think about how hard it's going to be, what we have to do. Just follow the framework. Stop thinking about it and start doing it. So I hate to steal this from Nike, but I don't really think that's where it comes from, but just do it. Just go do the thing. Go through the framework. What is the worst that could happen? You invest, I don't know, worst case scenario, 30 minutes. Possible someone could go through it in less time. Doesn't mean it's going to make it more impactful. But I think we have to go through it. And it's not going to give you an outcome. It's only not going to give you an outcome if you don't follow through and create the implementation plan. So, Dustin, what's one thing you would leave people with, whether it be that positive lie, that positive affirmation, or that one last thing that they just need to go do?
Ultimately, to me, it comes with starting with a single step. Journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. What is the action you're going to take to get at least one step closer to understanding where you want to go long-term and how you might get there?
I love it. I think that's exactly what some people need to hear. And we don't need it to be January 1 for us to have a New Year's resolution or to have a new plan or a new strategy. Every day is a good day to get started. That's what I think. And I don't care where you're at in your journey, in your life, and leadership. Start taking action and start it now. Don't wait to the end of the day. Don't wait to the next day. Start now. And with that said, we thank you for tuning in to another episode. Again, remember, this is a 6-part series. And this is one of those things where I want you to go through and I want you to work on as you go through the guide. I would like you to re-listen to it after you've gone through the guide, whether it be a month later or 6 months later, and then use all of these tools to continue to evolve and get better, because that's ultimately what a strategy and a vision is all about. If it stays stagnant, so are your results. So thank you so much for tuning in. We are always here for you as a resource. And if you haven't already, if you like the show, leave us a review. It takes a couple of seconds, but it makes a huge impact. Thanks again. Peace.